So as you know, for those of you who haven't joined us before, I'll just give you a quick rundown of how today's event will go. First, you'll be welcomed by our host, Chairman Langworthy, who will introduce our special guests today, Fox News contributor and columnist Liz Peek, and host of Newsmax Saturday Agenda, Joe Pinion. And then in the second portion of the event, we will turn it over to a Q&A with all of you in the audience. As always, you can ask your question one of two ways. If you want to be on camera, you can use the raise your hand function. If you don't want to be on camera, simply type your question into the Q&A box and we will read it aloud. So if you'd like to be on camera, use the raise your hand function, or you can type the question in and we will get through as many as we can throughout the hour today. And please feel free to go ahead and get that question into the queue at any time. And with that, I'll turn it over to our host, Chairman Langworthy. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica, and good afternoon, and welcome back to our Chairman's Town Hall series. It has been a great series that we've had since the pandemic started, and we're going to keep it going because it allows us to talk, to people throughout the week, all over the state of New York and all over the country, for that matter. I'm thrilled to welcome our very special guest that we have with us today, Fox News contributor and columnist Liz Peek, and the host of Saturday Agenda on Newsmax, Joe Pinion. Both of our guests today will bring to us their deep expertise, their insights about top issues facing our country right now, and what their viewpoint is as we discuss the Biden administration's first 100 days. Now, speaking of the Biden first 100 days, I'd like to start about commenting on Senator Tim Scott on what just a phenomenal speech following the president's address that Tim Scott delivered. I would say it's rightly being hailed as the best response ever given to a presidential address. We know how difficult, those speeches are. They're very scrutinized, and he blew the doors off of it with an incredible takedown of the Democrats' big lies while offering an optimistic viewpoint on America. And I think that's what so many of us and really just everyday folk are looking for, an optimistic viewpoint for the country going forward. Tim Scott really distinguished himself as one of the party's brightest stars and a very effective communicator. And I'm interested in talking with our guests more about that later on as we get into some of the other developments in Washington. And I know I'm not alone when I say that Joe Biden's first 100 days feels more like 100 years in policies. He promised to come into office as a moderate under the guise of unity, but he's done anything but that. He hasn't even pretended to work across the aisle. He's governed by executive fiat, and his policy proposals, from tax increases to killing the Keystone Pipeline to the Green New Deal, they are straight out of the radical left's playbook. The crisis at the border is in unprecedented levels. And he's appointed Kamala Harris to lead the effort, but she even refuses to go to the border to see what's going on there right now. All you really need to know now about the first 100 days is that AOC has praised him for doing every single thing that she wants. The radical left has taken total control of Washington and New York, for that matter. And while the damage that they're doing to our country is frightening, the contrast between our two parties has never been more clear. And people are waking up in a big way to the left's quest for total control over their lives. They're watching what's happened with big tech, censorship, and the corporate media in Hollywood, and sadly, even corporate America, who's bowed down to a lot of this nonsense. But it presents a tremendous opportunity for us in 2022. Here in New York, we have Chuck Schumer on the ballot, whose poll ratings are the lowest they've ever been. We've got more congressional seats added to the NRCC's target list this week for pickup opportunities. And I've said this many times, I believe that 2022 will deliver us the greatest electoral success and the greatest red wave that we have seen, not just here in New York, but across the country since 1994. But we need to stay out there fighting for common sense, fighting for the values that make America the greatest nation in the world. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our special guests. Liz Peek, Joe Pinion, thank you for being with us. Why don't we start off and we'll get right into it. Liz, why don't you give us your assessment of what the Biden first 100 days has really meant?
Well, I think you gave a great introduction, which is that all of us, our heads are spinning because Joe Biden really made two central campaign promises. One, that he would govern as a moderate, And second, that he was going to be a unifying candidate reach out to both sides of the aisle as president. I think, from on day one, I think he issued 17 executive orders, all of which overturned Trump policies. And it really seems to me that as he has gone through these last 100 days, that has been his number one driving force, eradicating everything that Trump did, whether it was good or bad. It didn't matter because it was Trump policies. And so we've seen really a cataclysmic, in my view, change, for example, in the Middle East, where he's basically gone out of his way to insult our partners in the Abraham Accords, primarily Saudi Arabia, which, by the way, was about to become the next Gulf state to sign on to this historic breakthrough alliance with Israel, which really would have set the foundation to ring fence Iran and really create a more peaceful future in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords cannot be overstressed in terms of the importance of that breakthrough in terms of geopolitical certainty and prospect, and the Biden administration basically undermined it from day one, insulting Netanyahu, not calling him for several weeks after the election, insulting Saudi Arabia. I mean, honestly, my head explodes. I can't understand what their thinking is. But obviously, that's just one thing that he did. More relevant to what American voters are looking at, and certainly relevant to his poll ratings, is eradicating all the stuff that Trump put in place in the border, particularly the Remain in Mexico policy, which had, at least on the surface and at least temporarily, solved the problem of this incredible surge of migrants coming across our border. And the reason it was temporary, probably, is that we still have a problem. We have a terrible immigration policy. It needs to be overhauled for sure. Trump had some very good ideas about that, which, by the way, were quite popular, like making immigration more dependent on people who were going to be contributing to our economy and our society from day one, et cetera, merit-based immigration. But Biden didn't really, and Biden knew what he was doing. He even warned about dismantling the Trump infrastructure too quickly because it would achieve 2 million people on our border. Well, guess what? That's what we're going to have this year, and it's all Joe Biden's fault. So it's almost an infantile impulse, in my view, that is driving Joe Biden to smash everything that Trump put in place. And it really is not working for the country. And frankly, I don't think it's working for Joe Biden. I mean, you have 74 million people, at least, who are offended by what he's doing. And every day I hear from more people, yeah, I voted for him because he wasn't Trump. By the way, 58% of the people who voted for Biden did not vote for Biden. This idea that he has a mandate is rubbish. He has no mandate. He has no big win in the House or the Senate, which justify this incredible leftward turn in terms of policy. And so, I think what we're seeing is sort of, frankly, I think the mojo's gone out of Biden right now. I think we've seen a stall in terms of their legislative agenda, which has been on steroids. Right now, I think the public is wising up to the idea that $6 trillion, an unimaginable amount of money that has been proposed in spending by Joe Biden, is really unconscionable and ultimately very damaging to our country. So I'll shut up for that. But I mean, there's a lot to talk about, I'll tell you what.
Well, we're going to give, both of you are used to, being on cable news and frequent commentators. You can give much more longer form answers here. So
yeah, sorry about that.
But that's great. We appreciate the insight. Now, Joe, I'm going to give you the same question. I mean, what's your first take? The Joe Biden first 100 days. I mean, where's the country going?
I've made the refrain. First of all, bravo to everything that Liz just said. I think that we're all kind of in agreement there. I've made the refrain before that Joe Biden has kind of, or is attempting to lull the person paying casual attention to the television to sleep. He's moving very slowly up the aisle on a bullet train headed for America that is unrecognizable. I think that Carl Sagan, in his last televised speech, talked about science as not just a recitation of facts, but a way of thinking. We know that politics is most certainly a science. And when you look at the science of what Democrats have put forth here, the laws of physics have been suspended. You're talking about the fact that we're having $6 trillion of new proposed spending. I don't think people truly have a full appreciation for what that means. I mean, we have been desensitized to astronomical sums of money by the fact that they just keep piling on more astronomical sums of money. You look at something like the recovery in 2008, 2009, which was supposed to be the end of the entire global economy. The United States of America spent $1.8 trillion. If you take the FDR New Deal, which is the most common refrain that Joe Biden is channeling his inner FDR, even if you adjusted all of the money that we spent on the New Deal for inflation, then adjusted that number for the fact that America is a much larger nation today, we have still have proposed spending here that dwarfs that many, many, many times over. So look, I think that when you look at this, going back to a way of thinking, that the same individuals that told us 3 years into a Trump administration that the 7 million jobs created under Trump policies had nothing to do with President Trump and everything to do with the previous administration, now want you to believe that 100 days into the Biden administration, the $1.9 trillion or $1.8 billion in COVID relief that they would pass. I will remind people that some of the checks haven't even made it to the mailboxes yet for the people who are in desperate need of help. And somehow that singular act is the reason why the economy is booming, and somehow don't see the connection between the fact that it's related to a vaccine that was created under the watch of the previous administration, while his opponents on the left mocked him and said that it would never happen. In fact, even in the month leading up to us being able to have the vaccine ready for dissemination, the left was still saying that not only would it not be available, but if it was available, they themselves would not trust the administration to give it out. So I think, again, we have to be honest with the people. I think we have to frame this conversation much differently. I think, Chairman, we've spoken about this. I think there is a love language disconnect in our politics, that we have to understand that some people, they like grand gestures. Some people, they like physical touch. Some people, they like gifts. I think we are in the business of telling people about the methods and the process. Democrats are in the business of sloganeering. They have all the slogans in the world that lead people to believe that the policies they put in place are going to change their life, when we know the soft bigotry of low expectations. They give people exactly what they need to stay exactly where they are. And in the aftermath of something as broad-reaching, as wide-ranging as the COVID crisis that we have faced, when the status quo falls apart because the people don't have access to the resources, they've been locked out of the workforce. Now, all of a sudden, it becomes glaringly apparent that those policies don't work. And instead of allowing that failure to come to the forefront from city to city, in places like New York City, in places like California, San Francisco, seeing the first decline in actual revenue that's going to be coming in from property taxes, instead of allowing us to take in that data, right? As people say, trust the science. There are multiple types of science that exist in the world, not just that what happens on the lab. We have decades worth of data that shows us that we need to start trusting the process, as people tell us, and the process dictates that these policies don't work. They have never worked. And Joe Biden is quickly capitulating to the types of things that people said would never happen. And they're hoping, they're so fanciful that we will actually turn a blind eye with the misguided belief that it could never happen here. But if we don't fight, like you said, Chairman, and like Liz has said, they most certainly have taken this wish list and turned it into a to-do list.
Well, between the two of you, you've really encapsulated this. I mean, we have what I think has gone on here in even the Trump administration in the beginning of this, unprecedented pandemic. I mean, we had to get relief to people. The PPP program, extremely successful, keeping small businesses, medium-sized businesses, big businesses open and solvent. Direct relief to taxpayers, so that they had, the opportunity to continue to pay their bills, while we had shutdowns. But it seems like Democrats are intent to give just a nice sample platter of socialism out to as many people as possible, so they get a taste of free stuff and of no consequence. Whether it's the extension of unemployment top-up benefits indefinitely, whatever, direct checks. You've got people that now want another round of direct checks, and not just the people that are out of work and need them, but people that might not need extra money right now. And it seems as though it's conditioning the electorate to want this way going forward. Meanwhile, we see our costs skyrocket. Groceries, gasoline, lumber, raw materials. I mean, everything is inflationary at this time because we're spending more and more public funds, and that's a direct result. But I talk to small business person after small business person that can't give away a job right now. Our office, where I'm sitting here in Buffalo, we're right next door to a wine store who cannot hire part-time clerks at $20 an hour because people would rather stay on the expanded unemployment benefit, which is more lucrative and doesn't require any work. Where are we heading if we continue on, down this road? We'll start with you, Joe, and give an overview here of how we can best fight back against some of these, the mindset of free stuff.
Well, look, I think Democrats have become quite astute, as I've said, in the act of sloganeering, right? They have these policies that are a mile wide and an inch deep. There is no such thing as free. My grandfather taught me at a very young age, just because somebody doesn't send you an invoice doesn't mean that you actually got it for free. We pay that price every day. We pay that price in the road outside of your home that's not paved properly. We pay that price with the fact that, yes, you're paying your taxes and your property taxes, but 50% of the children that go to public schools in the state of New York do not read at grade level, cannot do math at grade level. That is not because we do not have teachers working very hard. It's because we know that the best practices, that we have 30 years of data that show us what those best practices are, aren't being put into practice because of bureaucracy and people in politics on the left capitulating to the needs of unions. So at some basic level, we have to be able to start fighting back. You have this, people talking about this conditioning. I said, look, this is a business model that's been used before. Drug dealers routinely give away their product for free, and then they have customers for life. So that is what we are up against right now. Just to put it in very stark terms, you have a society right now that, in the midst of people being deprived of the dignity of work, are now being given what they need to be able to sustain themselves in this time of uncertainty, and in the process conditioning themselves to realize that they can get by without having to have any skin in the game or take any risk. America is built on enterprise. It's built on people being willing to do their part to make sure that this nation that we love, this republic, can actually depend on your neighbor, to depend that your neighbor has your back and that you have their back. We live now in such a polarized time right now where it almost feels like every person for themselves. They're telling people that the government has to be the source of your happiness, not understanding that the role of government as defined by our founders was for the government to set the conditions for you to claim that happiness for yourselves, for you to claim that joy and all of these things for yourselves. And so I think, Chairman, to your point, and I think even to Liz's earlier point, we have to get people to see past the slogans. We have to get people to see past that immediate gratification. The goal of a nation is not to give somebody something for a day. You can give anything to anybody for one day, for 1 week. What can you give to people for 100 years? What can you ensure to a nation for a generation? That should be our goal. That is the responsibility of people who put their hand on the Bible and take the oath to pass policies in the name of this nation that we love. And it has to start there. And it's not sexy. You can't can't hashtag it. You can't put it on a t-shirt and sell it to people, but it's something that we have to find ways to get into the drinking water again, because what they're putting in the drinking water is not fluoride. It's something much more insidious, and it's not fortifying your teeth in many ways. It's breaking down the core DNA of who we are as a people.
But you know, Joe, if I could break in, I
Sure.
think there were pretty good slogans that came out of the last administration. I think America first. I don't know what better slogan you could come up with. And, you know, an awful lot of Americans think when we talk about the Paris Climate Accord, for example,
Right.
which is going to really is going to be damaging to not only our overall economy, but to low income people in particular, as their electricity costs go through the roof. Put America first. Let's not worry about how the Germans think about our climate policies. Let's worry about Americans and how it's going to work for Americans.
Amen.
And I also think make America great again. I mean, you know, that was a great slogan because so many of us are looking at what the progressive left is doing. And I think you put it extremely well. It has to do with the American dream, encouraging and allowing people to follow their dream, to provide for themselves and their families, or become a ward of the state. That's a pretty big choice. And I think historically, Americans have really shunned the latter and really embraced the former. And I think, to me, that's really the most alarming thing going on in this country right now, is that there's so many people, as you say, who are very excited about and wooed by getting a check in the mail that they didn't earn and they didn't need. I mean, that's a very bad thing. And that's kind of where we are right now.
It's
Excuse
terrifying.
me.
No, that was perfect. And you know, we're just going to keep this a free flowing discussion. If you have a question, again, you know, we're here today live with Liz Peek, a Fox News contributor, and Joe Pinion, who is a host of a program on Newsmax. You can, 1 to 3 on
3 p.m. every Saturday.
all the free plugs that you want here. And we've got a great audience here with the NYGOP, and we really appreciate all that you do as you're viewing us here. You know, share the feed on your Facebook. You know, we have some of the great minds in the conservative movement and the party that we've asked to be with us here today. You know, the point I wanted to get to is, you know, the bait and switch of Joe Biden. Joe Biden was always the safe choice because they believed he was a centrist. You know, I believe that, you know, if truth be told, the realignment of that primary field was orchestrated by, you know, senior Obama era officials, or they forced people to get out of the race quickly to consolidate support around Joe Biden because they thought he was the best vehicle ultimately to win the race. Whether, you know, this is not the Joe Biden of 2012 or 2008 for that matter. But what we're seeing out of this administration is not policies that indicate he's a centrist. You know, I think there's deep concern that, you know, perhaps his ideology is thrown out the window and someone else is running the show or pulling the strings, you know, behind the scenes. And we're seeing an agenda more in line with AOC and her brand of socialism in the House than we are, you know, even Nancy Pelosi and in Joe Biden's era of the Democrat Party. You know, what do you think of that, Liz?
Well, I think that's exactly right. I think the greatest mystery in the Capitol right now is who really is pulling the strings. Is Ron Klain sort of, you know, in charge here? Is it AOC? Let's not forget, though, after Joe Biden won the South Carolina primary and he was the apparent victor in the primary race, Bernie Sanders basically said, okay, my followers are going to vote for you. We're going to all come out on November 3rd and vote for you if you will partner with me in forming a platform. And they did. Remember, it was sort of the unity platform. I think they taught that. That's where there's unity. It's in the left and the far left. And basically, Biden kind of bought into going along with Bernie Sanders because they knew they needed the progressive votes, because in 2016, that's who didn't show up. They view Donald Trump as as winning because Bernie Sanders' bros, so to speak, did not show up at the polls. They couldn't let that happen again, so they bought into his platform. And I think basically you've got the same dynamic still in place. I think it's augmented by the fact that even someone like Chuck Schumer is terrified of being primaried by AOC. That's been talked about. We've seen some very senior moderate so-called Democrats be toppled by the Justice Democrats and the AOC wing of the party. But it's so offensive because if you look at the self-identification of Americans, only about 15% of the country says that they are very liberal Democrats. That's the progressive wing. 15% of the country now seems to be in charge of our political agenda. It certainly is in charge of the Democrats' agenda. What I can't really put together in my head is how they think this will win in 22. And that's why I think we're sort of in a big stall right now. I think somehow, finally, the moderate Democrats who are in districts that Trump won, and I think there's 7 or 8 of them, clearly are vulnerable by all this swath of $6 trillion in proposed spending and HR 1, the voting law, and their urge to get rid of right to work states and all this really crazy far left agenda, packing the court, DC statehood, all this stuff that came at us sort of in a blitz. You know, Americans are like, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. And I mean, without a doubt, those districts are in play, and I suspect many others also. And the Republicans are wildly optimistic about the number of seats they're going to gain in the House. So, you know, I don't really understand how the leadership of the Democratic Party is allowing this to go so far so fast and put America on guard, because I think that's exactly where we are right now. And I know, you know, CBS and NBC keep talking about Biden's great poll numbers. If you go one layer down, they are not great poll numbers. A, they're not historically good for a new president. B, if you look at strongly approve versus strongly disapprove, many of them are 2-to-1 strongly disapproving of this president. So people on these calls are like, yeah, he's doing a fine job. But in terms of people who really know what they're talking about, they're just dumbfounded. So I'm optimistic about 22. I hope that turns out to be a well-placed optimism.
Joe, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I echo many of those sentiments. I think they're particularly, you look at somebody like Joe Biden, who's been around for so long, there's this notion that, oh, it's Uncle Joe. Well, Uncle Joe is gone. He's been replaced by Grandpa Joe, and we're not entirely sure that Grandpa Joe knows how to find his way to the Oval Office, much less what they're actually putting in front of him to sign. So that's the hard truth. It's unfortunate. And I think in many ways, I think that's a tactic that we can take, is that it's not that Joe Biden is a bad person, but that he is someone who is long in the tooth, whose days atop the wall on watch on behalf of America should have come to an end. And what is happening right now is in many ways tantamount to senior abuse. So that to me is what we can really be focused on, to be able to say, look, these policies are not what Joe Biden promised the American people. This is a man who said he wanted to unite the nation. And as Liz so eloquently said, has succeeded in only uniting the far left with the forgotten moderates of the party. That does very little for the vast majority of Americans who did not want to see their jobs go away, who does not want us to effectively reach for a green future at the expense of them being able to afford their day-to-day existence. Let's be very clear about the fact that it's poor Black and brown people who are the ones who end up paying a larger portion of their actual living expenses on electric costs that escalate. It's poor Black and brown students who have to deal with the fact that Joe Biden signed a massive COVID relief bill that did very little to guarantee that the schools would actually ever open the schoolhouse doors. In fact, when Republicans tried to add amendments to said COVID relief bill that had very little to do with COVID, to make sure that the back end spending, because we're talking about spending 3 and 4 and 5 years out on education that had very little to do with COVID, would actually be tethered to the schools opening, Democrats refused to allow them to do so. And so we know for a fact that the most vulnerable students are trapped in a virtual learning environment that we know leaves them even further behind than they already were. So I think issue by issue, I think we have to remind the American people that we're not telling you to hate Joe Biden. But what the policies that he are implementing are doing is not, that's not what you voted for. It's not what most Americans want. It's certainly not what the most vulnerable Americans need. And the outcomes they are promising, history shows us that the policies that they are putting in place rarely, if ever, have delivered those results. And if they did it for a day and certainly not for a generation.
You're spot on. As you look at everything they do, I mean, and we touched on this earlier, and several of our comments that have come into the chat are about the sloganeering that Democrats are so good at, and we're terrible. We want to be intellectually honest. We want to put good policies forward. They just want to put a good name on really garbage legislation that's going to ruin the country. And you look at this HR 1 that so many people are
For the People Act, I think they call it, right?
Yeah.
I call it the Legalized Rigged Elections Act. And it would fundamentally alter and put systems in place like the public financing of congressional elections and so many mandates that would alter how we choose our elected officials, which is dangerous. I certainly pray that the narrow margins in Congress will prevent this from becoming the law, and hopefully the courts are stand at the ready if it does by some slim chance make it through. But their jingoism is so superior to ours. What can we do? Several people have asked, what can we do to fight back against their messaging in these kind of circumstances?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. I think that's totally right. Not only that they have great messaging, I mean, I'll say something in politics, they lie. I mean, when they talk about a bill and they call it for the people, it's really not for the people. And if you get into it and read the bill, which very few people do, turns out to be really against the people. So they're very happy and very comfortable lying about things. But the other thing that Democrats are genius at, they all say the same thing. One pipes up with a comment and a phrase, and then you'll see 23 other Democrats basically say the same thing within 48 hours. It's amazing to me, and I don't know how they do it, frankly. I wish the Republicans were better at that. But I'd say two other quick things. One, I was at a conference recently and someone said, Republicans always have all the facts, but they don't communicate them in a way that really impresses people. And I think that's fair. I mean, I could go on and give you 60 data points on the economy, why we don't need all this spending. It didn't need, to Joe's point, we really didn't need the $1.9 trillion spending. People don't care. We could talk about the red states versus blue states. Every state that's in trouble is a state that's run by Democrats and embraces Democrat politics, whether it's and policies, whether it's California, New York, Illinois, New Jersey. I mean, look at them. Why doesn't anyone learn something from that? I have no idea. You'd think that intelligent voters would take away the fact that all the rich people are moving out of New York to Florida must mean something's wrong in New York. But nope, they've doubled down, raising taxes even this year when we don't need to raise taxes. I think it's very discouraging. I do think that, whoever runs for president in 24 has got to have an empathetic message. And I hate to use that word because that word was what got Joe Biden elected. And oh my gosh, what a mistake that was. But I think it's true. I think Republicans have to come a little bit closer to talking about things that are a little bit heartfelt to people, whether it's drug prices or, by the way, Joe, I think there's a big case. I wrote about this 2 months ago. If Republicans talk a lot about schools and children and their children not being allowed to be in school and how the teachers unions oppose that, I think that's a hugely winning issue. School choice, the time may have come for that to be a potent political topic. I sure hope so. Sorry I took so long on that.
No, I think it's excellent. And I think to that point, we have to meet people where they are. To the issue of slogans, because I'm a nerd and I have no life, right? I can go back and remember, back in 1984 when, Walter Mondale turned to then Senator Gary Hart saying, "Where's the beef?" I think that we as Republicans need to start telling the American people, you need to ask the Democrats, where's the beef, right?
Yeah.
We're printing a lot of money, but where's the beef? Here in New York City, we have, so what is it, 9-to-1 matching funds now for city races? So if you're a citizen of this state or a citizen of New York City, we can find 9-to-1 matching dollars to help people running campaigns they have no business probably being in, no chance of winning. But we can't find money for Chromebooks for children. We can't find the resources to make sure that children have access to Wi-Fi, to be able to get access to the internet, to be able to at least stumble through the distance learning we know doesn't work. I mean, this is getting so ridiculous now, where to, again, just issue by issue, I'm not saying that the intent is not good. What we're telling you is that the policies they are passing will never actually deliver the outcomes they are promising. And I think that has to be the message again and again, issue by issue. Like we talked about this last week, Chairman, we said, look, you want to talk about climate change? If you want to say that our goal as a nation has to be the complete reduction of carbon emissions, and we have to be carbon neutral, okay. I don't get to tell you what to believe, but I do get to demand you be intellectually consistent. It is intellectually inconsistent to believe you can do that without nuclear energy being at the forefront. It is intellectually inconsistent to believe that you can do that by saying that we are not going to have fracking. We know that natural gas is a low emissions fuel that is crucial to making sure that we can have these things going. Here in New York State, we have the Hudson River. We have no hydroelectricity to be found. The river is so polluted that you can't even eat the fish that swim there. But somehow, apparently, we have to spend 10 and 15 years to get a study done to figure out if we can use the power of the Hudson River to make sure that we can power this great state with a green, renewable type energy that can give us the type of robust support we need. And by the way, bring the type of jobs that pay the living wages that the people on the left say they're so desperately in need of. The innovation that is required to make sure that this state and this nation can be at the forefront of everything, to remain the preeminent nation in the world, to be the leader of the free world. They are there. They are at our fingertips. The solutions we know exist on the right. Our responsibility and our challenge is to ensure that we are taking that message to people in a way that is passionate, in a way that resonates, to go to even communities of color, who I tell people all the time, Black people are not undereducated when it comes to what Republicans believe. They're unconvinced that we are sincere in our concern for their outcomes. We can actually communicate our sincerity to make sure that they believe the words coming out of our mouth, that they actually trust the words that we are professing. When we can go to people, you go to the majority of Black people in this country, they are self-identified, moderate, or conservative. That's not my opinion. That's the polling. The polling tells you that Black people in this country are self-identified, moderate, or conservative, and we vote almost, writ large for the Democratic Party. Even if you talk about the gains that President Trump made in this past election or the past 2 cycles, if you talk about this precipitous gains you've made in the Latino community, particularly in places like New York State, it has been a monolith. We need to change that. We change that by demonstrating our sincerity. We change that by asking quite clearly, what do you care about? What is their policy? Show me the beef, and let me tell you why you're leaving every day malnourished, because the policies they've put in place.
Wow, that's a mic drop moment. You're doing great. Jamie Shalino, someone who's very active in Voices for Seniors, she writes in that she's worried about the mental state of our children more than herself, and other states have followed the science. Do you think New York will follow the science and stop politicizing the pandemic and get our children back to school and people back to work before 2022?
Well, I'll just say that Joe mentioned something that is truly offensive on this topic, which is that in the, I think it was $120 billion in the American Rescue Plan for schools K through 12, as he said, which I thought was pretty remarkable, the schools were asked to come up with a plan to reopen, but not actually to reopen to receive this money. So there's basically been no federal push, no push from Democrats across the board, and worst of all in New York, enormous obstructionism in terms of opening schools. And I agree that our kids are really being hurt. As Joe pointed out, it's in particular minority kids who are being hurt by losing months and months, and in some cases an entire year. What's remarkable to me is they're still not committing even to opening in September. And that to me is a disgrace. And again, I think this is a potent political issue and that will resonate with an awful lot of families. This is a family around the kitchen table issue. And man, in fact, I was talking to my doorman in Manhattan today about this. His kids have not been in school. He and his wife are having to pay for a tutor twice a week to work with their kid, something they really can't afford. But he said, this is the most important thing in the world to us. Our kids falling behind on these Zoom classes. To add insult to injury, oftentimes the teacher either doesn't show up or basically isn't teaching. I mean, and we all know that, we've all read this stuff, but to actually hear it from somebody that they walked in and seen their kid being shown, you know, a video that's not educational or something like that, it's pretty appalling. So I agree with this concern 100%.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'll add to that, you know, I think some people know, but, you know, my grandmother passed away 2 weeks ago, 100 years old. She's lived a wonderful life. But I mentioned it because my fourth grade teacher came to the wake for my grandmother. And he remarked that, you know, when my mother my mother said, look, your mother dropped you off for your class. She only asked me two things. She said to send me back a well-rounded person and to send me back somebody who was prepared to go into the world. I think on those 2 points alone, right now, we are failing children all across this nation. You cannot have well-rounded children via Zoom. You cannot craft lives. You cannot have a true impact. It can help save some time, but it cannot encapsulate the time that you would otherwise have in an in-person environment to put your hand on the shoulder of a kid and say, what's going on? What's going on with you? What's happening? How are you feeling? Why are you struggling here? And also, we know that it's an impediment to provide the type of actual educational, pedagogical implementation that is required to let children actually have a pathway to the type of educational outcomes that we have promised. So I think across the board, we've got some real problems here. We're failing children. And I think that the inability of the politicians to even acknowledge it. You know, I'm born and raised in Yonkers. I mean, it's really crazy. The Senate Majority Leader for the New York State Senate represents my hometown. The person who sits on top of the Educational Committee represents my hometown in Yonkers. Here in New York State, the Majority Leader for the U.S. Senate represents the state of New York. The average school building in the city of Yonkers is over 75 years old. The state won't give us the money to actually build the new schools that we require. The federal government has not come in to give us the resources that we desire. And this is a city that was the first place where we had a joint lawsuit for segregation in public housing and in education. So you look at something like that so crystallized in a place like Yonkers, New York. You extrapolate that to a place like the state of New York. You expand that across the country. The abject neglect that is choking this nation, because it's not, you look at it as though we're canceling out these children's future. We're canceling our own future because we're failing to deliver for these children today. And when you have broken children, you have broken men, you have broken women, because we haven't given them the chance to become the best version of themselves. And I think, to Liz's point, that is the message that we should be knocking into the heads of those who don't want to listen from now until Election Day into 2022 and beyond.
Well, you mentioned a couple things that bring me to our next topic, and something, you know, with all the discussion of Cuomo, and we go a little too far on Cuomo sometimes, because it's our absolute number one priority is to elect a Republican governor of this state. But we do need to talk about these federal topics. And we have a New Yorker who has risen to the highest ranks of any New Yorker, you know, in the Congress, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer. And Chuck's another one who always wanted to be seen as a moderate, you know, backslapper, backroom guy, cut the deal. But he couldn't do that when he was a Democratic leader, when President Trump was in the White House, because he was afraid of his extreme left, and that extreme left, like that AOC movement, and that primary that would bring him. Chuck is bragging that $100 billion is rained down on New York from every corner, from the MTA to the state to the city to the school districts. You name it, free money for all, just no consequences. Yet New York State government still raised our taxes by $4 billion this year. Let's give a greater performance. Chuck Schumer is Senate Majority Leader. Joe, you want to jump in here?
Sure. Just to reiterate my earlier point, the question becomes, where's the beef? How has this materially impacted the lives of the people that live here? You want to talk about its rain in cash, then why do the people in New York feel like paupers? You want to talk about the fact that you're pushing for a $15 minimum wage. Chuck, I don't know if you've heard, we already have that here. How is that actually going to be something that's going to impact the lives of the people in New York who are struggling? You want to talk about Medicare for all or expanding the Affordable Care Act. Let's just talk about the fact that while you're holding a press conference outside the public hospital, inside, the people who are in those beds, particularly during the COVID-19 crisis, were saying, don't let me die here. Those nursing homes that, we were forced in. My grandmother got to be in a wonderful facility, but a lot of those facilities ain't so wonderful. I use the word ain't with intention, because to use proper English would probably be disrespectful to the people who are forced to stay there. This is a hard truth that we just need to be able to communicate, that there is no utility in power if that power is not used to first and foremost improve the lives of the people who put you in power. And this is the failure that we have across the board here in New York State, where we have people who are so focused on maintaining that power that they are really focused on the mechanics of the politics than the substance of meaningful change that the people of this state, the people of New York City, truly deserve. And I don't know how we get it through. If I did read all, I guess I'd be really rich. Because I think the hard truth is that we've struggled to do it. But we have to find a way to get that message through. I think, we're talking about Cuomo. I remember when Mario Cuomo lost that election in 1994 to George Pataki. And in his concession speech, he says that New York City is to the nation what the church spire, church spire is, the spire is to the church, right? And that it is the plume, the white plume that says that we must go upwards. Excelsior, we must go upwards. We're not going upwards anymore. It's getting really bad here. And so I think that on some basic level, we just have to ask the people, if everything was so great, if Democrats controlling everything were so wonderful, if all these policies were so comprehensive, why has your life not changed? Why has your life not improved? And don't tell me it's about Donald Trump, because even if you look at something like the border, they just revoked all of the policies that President Trump put in place that you said were so terrible. And the conditions on the border now are worse than when President Trump left office. Precipitously worse. 3 times as many children in the cages that were built by the Biden and Obama administration. We've gone from 36,000 crossings in 2020 to 2021 to over 130,000 crossings. So, I mean, it's bad, folks. And I think that we just have to be able to keep calling attention to the fact that if the things they promised were so good, you wouldn't have any problems in your life. As I tell Black voters all the time, if voting for Democrats solved Black people's problems, Black people wouldn't have any more problems, because we've been voting for Democrats as a bloc for 40 years. And you can look at the outcomes, education, professional, poverty rates. It's not helping us.
Chuck Schumer has never had a job outside of the government. I mean, he went from law school immediately to the state assembly to the House of Representatives, and now has been our senator since he defeated Alfonso D'Amato in the 1998 elections. I was a senior in high school when he was elected to the U.S. Senate. And other than fly around the state on our dime and show up and and state the obvious usually, or, complain about a problem and not offer a single solution. He's only provided showing up as accomplishment. And he's the ultimate hit and run politician, just running to the camera, but running away from the hard work.
But Chairman, can I just interpose? Aren't there a lot of Democrats for whom the private sector is alien territory? I mean, I think that's one of the big, I really think it's a big issue in terms of their policy driven agenda on how they treat businesses. New York, I think, ranks dead last in terms of policies that are friendly to business creation and so forth. And by the way, to Joe's point, where is the beef indeed? I mean, if this was all working, if all this minimum wage and paid leave and all these policies were really going to build the unions or build the private workforce, none of that is working. There's no question about it. But to this issue of no private sector experience, Obama is basically, he filled his entire White House. No one in that White House, which is a first, I think, historically, had a private sector job. Joe Biden's never really worked in the private sector, as far as I know. He's like the entire political man. These people do not know what makes small business tick. They don't know how devastating it is when you allow riots to burn up and tear down block after block after block of small businesses. Where's the beef? It went away. I mean, these policies these guys are embracing have been destructive as can be. And it's obviously true in New York. We've got not only economic policies that are going bad, but also the no bail reforms and all the crime, what I would call pro-crime legislation. That's like the death knell for New York City. People aren't going to come back if it's not safe. And no one, I know you don't want to talk about New York politics particularly, but no one is running for mayor is talking about that. And I think for most people, or for an awful lot of people, that's the number one issue right now.
Well, safety and security will be on the ballot in 21 and 22. Yeah. We have to have that not just in New York, but nationwide.
Yeah, totally.
We have, Democratic leadership that puts criminals way ahead of the hardworking, law-abiding taxpayer. And that's been an epidemic in our state. Our state is the capital of it. I want to read through some of the observations of some people that have put some things forward. Touching on the Schumer and 40 years in government and politics. James Leeper writes in just an observation of, won't it be great for the NYGOP and the people of the state of New York to have Elise Stefanik elected as the House conference chair in the Republican Party. I absolutely agree with you wholeheartedly, James. Elise Stefanik going into the leadership, well, she'll be the first, New Yorker in elected Republican leadership since Tom Reynolds was NRCC chairman back in the middle 2000s. It puts us on the map. Jack Kemp was the last Republican conference chair from New York, puts her in very elite territory and helps her be a stronger advocate for, Northeastern Republicans, New York Republicans in 50 states. And her voice is so desperately needed. We will have a millennial woman in the House leadership, while 3 of the House leaders on the Democratic side of the aisle are in their 80s. I'll take that juxtaposition any single day. And I think we're very excited. We're very proud of Elise Stefanik. We back her wholeheartedly. And we really hope that this happens and happens very quickly. Our friend Damon Hagan writes in, how do we counter the media bias going into 22? It was so blatantly obvious going into the presidential election, and they had round the clock, Donald Trump to kick around, to, pick apart every single move the administration made. Now it seems like there's crickets on, the 2 stations I don't watch. But really, how do we counter this as Republicans? What is the best tactic forward? I mean, we have to go take our message to people across the spectrum. We can't just use conservative media to do it. What say you?
I'll say a couple of things. One is, I think there are 2 big issues. One is big tech and social media, and the other is traditional media. As to social media, I think really people on the right have to come together and show that we have a voice. And what I have been tweeting for weeks, May 15th, no posts, no tweets, take a day off from social media and let them know that there are 75 million Americans who don't like what they're doing. And I mean, honestly, I can't do this by myself, but if everybody I know, if all the radio guys I work with and everybody else begins asking people just to stay off social media one day, because the left does this very well. They get all organized and they kind of do these boycotts and stuff. There are a lot of Americans with a lot of clout who don't do anything. We don't raise our hand. We're too polite. We don't speak up. I think big tech needs to hear from Americans that we don't like what happened in the 2020 election. And we don't like what's going on now with the canceling of President Trump and many other people, by the way. As to regular media, I tell you the truth, I don't know. I mean, I'm actually watching at the New York Times, kind of an odd thing where occasionally now they're writing articles where I'm sort of like, wow, I'm really surprised. Front page article about a Swiss billionaire pouring hundreds of millions of dollars into Democrat coffers and how actually Democrats had more dark money, so to speak, than Republicans in the last cycle. You don't see the New York Times admit things like that very often. I'm kind of wondering if they are beginning to get a little nervous that they've lost half the country, because they sure have. So I don't know. Other than that, how you strike back at it, I have no idea. I really don't.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, I think that it is about coming together. I think that in many ways, to build on what Liz is saying, it has to be bigger than social media. I think that we have to turn almost everything off. I think that if conservatives got together and said that, you know, for a day or 2 days, we're not, you know, almost like a fast, right? Like
Yeah.
we're not watching the television for anybody. We're not using social media for anybody. That we are going to use that day perhaps as a day to reconnect with our neighbors and reconnect with our community. I think that would be a very powerful statement for a nation of conservatives amongst, you know, over 75 million individuals who went to the polls and said that they did not want what Democrats had promised. I think that that would be a powerful statement. Can we get it done? I think that that's incumbent on us, those of us who have the opportunity to be on platforms like this, to message, to get that word out. I think also there is some added benefit, perhaps, in maybe turning down the base. And by base, I mean the actual base. I mean, I think sometimes, you know, in politics and particularly in the news, I feel like we crank up the bass all the time, right? It's just like you're in the car, you're driving down the highway, you crank up the volume. I think sometimes we just have to, it turns into white noise for a lot of people sitting at home who are just overwhelmed. They just don't know where to turn to. I think if we had taken a more skillful approach, perhaps a more precise approach to really explain to people what happened during this COVID pandemic, that not just the Department of Homeland Security, but then also independent economists have shown concretely that China knew in the very early stages how bad this COVID crisis was going to be, that they lied to the world, that they manipulated the World Health Organization, that they used that manipulation. If we're talking about Andrew Cuomo manipulating data to hide 3,000 deaths, they used data to manipulate the globe, all while they were stockpiling the PPE supply that we knew would be crucial in saving lives. Time loss is life loss. They manipulated the data to be able to monopolize the supplies necessary to fight a pandemic that they let escape their borders and spread around the globe by failing to inform us that the threat existed in the first place. I think if we just focused on the facts, because the facts are on our side, I think we would have been in a much better position to be able to reach the people we needed to reach, to have that margin that we needed to be able to be victorious in the places where I think we actually could have been. But I think, you know, to Liz's point, we also have to recognize the fact that we're probably not going to get the fairest shake. And so it really does become incumbent on us to get the word out, to get those individuals in our midst who might feel discouraged, to not be discouraged, to say that, look, you have to come out and you have to vote. You have to be engaged in all of this stuff. You have to be willing to do that work, because otherwise, if you take the year off, if you take 22 off, if you take 2021 off, guess what? We're not going to win. If we come out in a force in these off-year elections, we'll confound many expectations, not just here in New York, but around the country.
Couldn't have said it better myself. We have on screen here with us Brian Rusk of the great town of Amherst. How are you, Brian? You got a...
Thank you. Can you hear me, Chairman?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thanks to Chairman Nick Langworthy, a gutsy, in-your-face, strong New York State Republican chair. And thanks Ms. Peak and Mr. Pinion for the truth. The Biden failed 100 days. We have a $4 trillion federal annual budget. Sleepy Joe at the switch wants to spend $12 trillion this year, triple the annual federal budget. This is not sustainable, and we will have a stock market crash in a year and a half, cutting New York State property values in half. As U.S. Senator Tim Scott said, we are not a racist country. We will always have, unfortunately, anti-Black, anti-white incidents, which I abhor. Proof we are not racist country is that with 14% of America Black, the United States elected a Black in Obama twice. In New York State, we have a Black Assembly Speaker, Black President of the State Senate, and Black Attorney General in New York State. It is plain dumb to say we are racist in the United States in New York State. The GOP must, under Chairman Nick Langworthy, have a big tent with conservative Blacks, gays, Hispanics, and Asians to win back the House, Senate, and the White House. As Amway founder Rich DeVos would say, you can do it. Yes, we can. Thank you, Chairman Nick Langworthy.
Thank you, Brian. It's never usually a question. It's a little more of a monologue. And that's okay, because it's well thought out. We appreciate you sharing your thoughts, Brian Rusk, and for all you do for our party. I can't, thank Joe and Liz enough for taking time out of your very busy schedules. We enjoy watching you on cable news. Really enjoyed spending an hour with you, with members of the NYGOP, and we hope we can have you back, sometime soon.
Anytime.
Absolutely.
Thank you for having us. Hammer me. Thank you.
No, truly appreciate it. And even to Chairman's last point, I said, look, even to the messaging point, the next day after Tim Scott said that we weren't a racist nation, the president of the United States got on Good Morning America and said that we weren't a racist nation.
That's
and
right.
The vice president of the United States, Kamala Harris, who is also Black, got on Good Morning America and said that America was not a racist nation. And the only difference was that Tim Scott was apparently a deficient Black person for saying it, but apparently Vice President Kamala Harris was not. And this is the type of hypocrisy that I think that it's incumbent on us to put on display, to say that, look, if you believe we're a racist nation, I'll pray for you. But if that's your belief, then hold everyone who has that belief accountable. And if you're not treating Tim Scott the same way that you treat Kamala Harris, and in fact, if anyone dared to treat Tim Scott the way that you Kamala Harris, the way that you guys have treated Tim Scott, the universe would explode. The walls of Jericho would come tumbling down. And I think the Democrats would lose their ever-loving mind. So I think on some basic level, it's important for us to stress the fact that, yes, the vestiges of racism are real, but the progress that we have made is also equally real. And if we want to continue to make that progress, that we need to highlight the success, we need to snuff out the problems, and the tip of the spear has to be a conservative movement committed to those early teachings and thrusts of Lincoln and those early abolitionists.
Excellent. I think you got a lot more to say, Joe.
I'm just warming up, man.
I was going to say, he's just warming up. Exactly.
More to come. If you like what you heard, please join us at nygop.org and support our party. We are working day and night to make this the most competitive and successful 2022 election cycle ever, to elect a Republican governor, to put together the most successful ticket that we've had since 1994, when we shocked the world and elected George Pataki governor and Dennis Vacco as attorney general. Our best days are ahead of us, but we need you to achieve, all of the goals that we've outlined. So I thank you for being with us. I thank you for spending your lunch hour with us. And we look forward to being together again very soon. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank
Have a good
you.
one.